Horror games have been around for decades. Why people like horror in general is highly individual. A fascination of the macabre, or the more traditional fact that people like getting scared. They like the adrenaline kick or anxiety that a scary movie, for example, might provide if done right. But as much as scary movies can create exhilaration by directly scaring you, video games induces an entirely different type of terror. They have something movies do not: interactability. See, when playing a horror game and that inevitable scare happens, or when that terrifying enemy chases you, it feels a bit more personal, especially in first-person horror games. This immersion is the key to creating an effective horror game, and when you avoid going to the bathroom during the witching hour in fear of getting ambushed by a spooky monster, yeah, that unease is going to stay with you. This is something that I've been wanting to explore for a long time, and what I am going to talk about today, right now, the intrigue of being scared, different types of horror, bad horror, good horror, and lastly, the legacy that this medium has created. So ladies and gentlemen, please step into my humble abode and leave the reality and safety behind. Way back when, in the 30s, the horror scene had begun to take moviegoers by storm. The massive success of Dracula starring Bela Lugosi had spawned a large amount of movies in the same vein. You get it? Vein? Like, okay. But the horror scene didn't really solidify until the 70s, when the horror movie barrage would occur, with hit after hit after hit after hit. And when all these movies started smashing the box office, game developers also began to realize the immense potential of capitalizing on terror. From the early days of Haunted House and Alone in the Dark, to Clock Tower, System Shock and Resident Evil. The main purpose of the game developers making these games, aside from creating a memorable experience, had always been a singular goal: to bring about fear. And earning some money. Fear is one of our most primal instincts. It's been with us since ancient times, and it's just as potent in today's time and age. So when video games started to creep into everyday people's homes, so did the sweat, stress and nightmares from horror games. The rapid progress of graphics only amplified this phenomenon. It has even spilled out into other genres due to how intriguing it is, especially when done right, how much it affects the player. Some games have simply chosen to adapt the theme of horror, like Castlevania, while refraining from being a horror game specifically. With all this, it's not hard to see why horror, to this day, is such a perfect fit for video games. Now, with the intrigue explained, let's talk about the different types of fear. There's a very big difference between being a victim to a classic jump scare and experiencing an atmospheric build-up with a layer of uncertainty. The first is almost sure to spike your heart rate, maybe even put you into a state of stress, while the other kind can have a more lasting effect, even impacting you after you've turned off the game. Due to the almost unending types of fear, the ones I wanna talk about mainly relates to those that horror game designers try to induce in the player, and those that I feel is the most important. Jump scares are the most used and oldest trick that both horror movies as well as games use. This fear is called reactionary fear, and in the case of video games, the intention is to scare the player by surprising them through a jarring and abrupt change in image or events. Oftentimes these are used when a game is perhaps too quiet or after a long period of suspense, and can also be used to great effect when trying to induce stress. Storytelling through level design and use of music that amplifies tension are two stellar examples: atmospheric build-up and suspense. If used effectively, this can increase the anxiety and paranoia in a player. Jump scares or subversions of expectations can be used in accordance with these types of fear to very great effect. This can also be called an anticipated type of fear, where you're just waiting for something to happen. And it either does or it whittles out, increasing the paranoia and anxiety. My favorite type of fear is long-lasting, one that messes with your brain sometimes even after you've turned off the game, the movie, put down the book, or whatever you're doing. In other words, psychological. This can come in the form of a well-made story, maybe focusing on existential dread, or it may even be something that breaks boundaries, where it suddenly feels like the game may even begin to feel a bit too personal, interacting with you in messed up ways. Many feel like the worst type of fear is stress. When something becomes too overwhelming or you're being actively chased, especially from an unbeatable foe, that's definitely something that can have a real-life effect on you. Sweaty palms or cold sweat and dizziness isn't too uncommon either. Our deep-rooted fight or flight gene can be tightly linked to stress, including feeling or being put into helpless situations. Subverted fear is highly specific. Summed up, it's the unexpected that scares you. A subverted fear can contrast used compellingly, and it can also be the example when a safe room suddenly becomes, well, not so safe. A build-up leading nowhere, then suddenly Uno reversing, causing you to cry out for your mommy, is also a type of subversion. Deep-rooted dread follows you for a longer time, and is sometimes associated with a special scenario, phobia or memory. Getting scared in a way that has an enduring impact on your psyche is very hard to achieve. But oh boy, is it true to its namesake, terrifying. Checking out the horror game your uncle is playing despite his very real warnings, and getting an established very real fear of zombies when I was young is not something I recommend. And throwing in a bonus, a fear I've coined myself, at least in this video, adaptable fear. This can potentially be the scariest of them all, by always changing, subverting your expectations, surprising you, and ultimately terrifying you. A great example is the way that Until Dawn works with its therapy sessions, and your choices actively changing gameplay, although it's very minor. With the types of horror and fear fresh in mind, let's talk about some good and bad examples of each of these. Jump scares is to horror games as caveman is to human evolution. I'm sorry for blowing your mind like that. One of the oldest is also still one of the best. The intense tension and incredibly thick tone contrasts along with the fear of survival, brings the scares to the highest peak. The window room with dogs is a perfect example of this, mainly due to how unexpected it is. Second best is probably the damned locker from Silent Hill. I have a love-hate relationship with that locker. That said, bad jump scares absolutely ruin the immersion if done poorly. And unfortunately for it, Layers of Fear is one of the biggest perpetrators there is. A great atmospheric mindfuck horror game that I personally really like, it's one of my favorites, barred by the scars of cheap jump scares. It's a damn shame. The beginning 30 to 60 minutes of Alien Isolation immediately solidifies it among the very best that horror has to offer. In particular, it excels at setting a scene, a situation, and continually builds upon that until the xenomorph reveal. And then it just cranks it up even further. Paranoia flows from minute one, and it always feels like someone is right behind you throughout the entire game. And that is how you build suspense. While Until Dawn expertly captured the feeling and setting of a classic slasher horror game, Man of Medan started out incredibly only to crash land in a pile of doo-doo.
I am the great mighty Pooh.
It fails to capture any suspense, and the atmosphere quickly fades and turns into disinterest in the flat characters that you won't really care about if they bite the dust. Although putting Silent Hill would have been a home run for this time, Soma, at least to me, props it up even further. Without going into any kind of spoilers, the story told throughout the game is one of the best ever written, in my opinion, and brings about a satisfying conclusion. But it constantly makes you question yourself, life and humanity even, to the point where the ending is bittersweet, leaving behind a long-drawn terror that hasn't left me since I finished the game in 2015. Unfortunately, both Downpour and Homecoming missed the mark when it comes to create a psychological horror game, venturing more into the action side of things. Both premises had immense potential, and at times it was a great experience even, yet it lacks the core of what makes psychological horror, and especially Silent Hill, into such a good game. When talking about stress in horror games, the examples would be too many to list, yet I want to zero in on an underrated game. A game called Cry of Fear. Cry of Fear does an incredible job at making the player feel helpless, even though weapons are available. The devs, Team Skallar, also barrages you with curveballs in creative ways. I cannot sing the praises of this free game enough, and you should really go and play it, like right now. That is, unlike a certain game that you should probably just skip. Removing any immediacy and any tension except for the beginning school sections, and seemingly not understanding what makes the first game so stressful, killed what would have been another instant classic for Outlast 2. A shame that they didn't continue on the path of the more psychological aspects, and instead relied mostly on cheap gimmicks. It feels like an entirely different team made the second game, almost. Eternal Darkness was so ahead of its time, it's ridiculous. It can easily compete with today's selection in terms of writing and genius ingenuity, subverting your every expectation in a myriad of ways and constantly making you question your sanity is Eternal Darkness' specialty, and no one does it better than them. Amnesia Rebirth did an incredible job at subverting our expectations, but unfortunately it was in the wrong direction. Rebirth gives us less scary tension and a basic monster design that honestly isn't very scary, especially not after the first time. Paired up with a chatty protagonist, the game misses the biggest marks in what made the prequel so successful. PT does many things right. It creates an enormous mystery from the start. It screws with your mind in ways that makes you question your everyday life, and it leaves deep mental scars of terror in its wake. Saying that PT was and still continues to be a gigantic mark on the horror genre is an understatement. An obscure horror mystery with a terrifying, magnificent Lisa creeping on you constantly. If not from right behind you, maybe looking down on you from upstairs, behind a window, through a small door opening, or coming at you right from the front, twitching in the very unnatural manner that she does. Ugh, I hate that. And undoubtedly evoking a few squeals for mommy when she does. Every loop is different, yet so extremely similar, causing a strange mix of unease that almost unnoticeably creeps up on you. It's honestly surprising how immediate PT clutched the attention of everyone even slightly interested in horror, causing a joint effort trying to unveil the mystery. And shortly thereafter, the reveal that this was a Silent Hill game with big names like Guillermo del Toro, Hideo Kojima and Norman Reedus only served to maximize anticipation. No matter how you twist and turn, PT was and continues to be amazing, and a lesson in how not to handle a long-awaited sequel or reboot. The only remains is a faint demo that you can't download legally, wink wink, anymore, and a disappointing remainder of wasted potential and what could have been. Making horror games effective almost exclusively means combining and utilizing the types of horror and fear to their fullest. Not relying on cheap jump scares or easy cop-outs that fades from your memory in less than 1 hour, but instead trying to either create something wholly unique or never seen before, or taking the parts from the formula and polishing it as close to perfection as possible, while also trying to create something that's your own. The pace for horror games have gained a slight upwards trend these later years. And although I'm a scaredy meow cat, I also love the intense feeling and atmosphere that only these games provide. I doubt the intensity will slow down anytime soon, and I, for one, am very happy with that. Before ending this video, I'd like to thank you all for giving me the time of day or night to watch something I put a lot of effort into. I always like to create some video around Halloween because it's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, holiday. And there's always this unique feeling in the air. It's very hard to explain the feeling, but if you know, you know. Despite it all, I want to thank every one of you for just supporting me throughout all these videos. Thank you again and have a good night. Bye bye.